Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The hospital ward was quiet except for the occasional beep of the old ECG machine by the wall. The smell of disinfectant was heavy in the air, mixing with the rustling of nurses' slippers and the hollow coughs of other patients. Mama Nena lay weakly on her bed, her breath shallow, her frail fingers curled on the thin bedsheet. She had no strength to speak. She had been sick for weeks now, a combination of high blood pressure, ulcer, and general body weakness that came with age and neglect. Her children had finally brought her here, but not out of love. It was clear in their eyes, in their stiff greetings, in how quickly they checked their phones when she tried to speak. But today, what hurt most wasn't their coldness. It was what she heard. Through the thin cotton curtain beside her bed, she heard her first daughter Adiz whisper to the doctor, "She's old, doctor. What's the point of all this treatment? If she wants to go, let her go." Her second son, Kalechi, chimed in, "We can't keep wasting money. Just keep her comfortable. But no more treatments." And the youngest, Santo, nodded, adding softly, "She has lived enough. God knows we tried." The doctor didn't respond immediately. But for Mama Nena, the silence screamed. Her soul broke. She didn't cry. Not then. Not yet. Her eyes were too dry, her body too tired, her mind too full. She had lived long enough to know that silence could hold more betrayal than words. As they stepped away, she closed her eyes and let the betrayal wash over her like hot oil. So this was it? After everything? After all the years of raising them alone, selling her only piece of land, working under the sun, carrying blocks at construction sites, borrowing money to pay school fees? This was the reward? To be thrown away like a broken piece of furniture? Her chest rose and fell as her body fought to hold on, but not to life anymore. To dignity, to memory, to the image of the babies she once carried. She could still see Adiz's tiny feet kicking against her back as she tied her with a wrapper and walked to the market. She remembered Kalechi crying for bread while she begged her neighbor for leftover Gary. She remembered Santo's first fever and how she stayed up 3 nights rubbing palm oil on his chest because they couldn't afford medicine. She had done it all, alone, without complaint, with faith. But now, the children she had fed with her blood wanted her gone, because treatment was too expensive. The nurse walked in shortly after the children left, her young face full of worry as she checked the charts. But Mama Nena barely heard her voice. Her mind was still behind the curtain, replaying her children's words on a loop. The betrayal was so loud it drowned out everything else. She didn't even flinch when the nurse touched her wrist to check her pulse. The betrayal had dulled her body, but one part of her remained alive, her memory. She would not forget, not what she heard, not what it meant. That evening, when the light outside the hospital window turned orange and shadows filled the room, she closed her eyes not to rest, but to remember, not to sleep, but to cry silently in a place where no one could see. And from that moment on, something inside her began to change, not her body, which continued to fail her, but her soul, her will to trust, her ability to believe in the children she had once called her whole world. Long before her body began to fail her, Mama Nena had survived worse than sickness. She had survived betrayal before, not from her children, but from the man she once loved. His name was Obina, and she had married him with a full heart and empty pockets. They were young, poor, but hopeful. She remembered the way he used to laugh when she fetched water for him, the way he called her my queen, even when their roof leaked during rainy season. But that love didn't last. When their third child was born and responsibilities grew, Obina began to change. He stayed out longer, came home with perfume she didn't wear, started hitting her during arguments, and eventually stopped looking at her altogether. Then one day, he simply walked away. He said he was tired of poverty and needed a woman who understood ambition. That woman was a cloth seller from ABA who had her own shop and no children. Nena begged him that day, not for herself, but for the children. He pushed her aside. That was the last time she saw him. The day Obina left, Mama Nena became two people. One part of her broke, the other grew steel bones. She wiped her tears with the same wrapper she would later use to carry her babies on her back. She went to her in-laws, but they said it wasn't their business. She went to her church, but all they could offer was, "We will pray for you." So she turned to the soil. She dug people's farms, carried firewood, fetched water for homes, sold pepper, and smoked fish in a roadside stall. She did it all with a baby tied to her back, another clinging to her wrapper, and one coughing on her lap. She never complained, never begged. She worked, day after day, night after night. Sometimes she didn't eat, but her children always did. It was her pride. She made sure they never went to school late, never wore torn uniforms for too long, never looked like they didn't belong. And in return, all she ever wanted was for them to become people who would not forget her. Not this way. So as she lay on that hospital bed, overhearing her children discuss how her life was no longer worth saving, the pain went deeper than flesh. It stabbed through memories, through everything she had carried and conquered alone. Her ears were old, but they heard clearly. Her mind was weary, but it remembered sharply. She realized that people don't betray you by what they say. They betray you by what they are willing to let you lose, even your life. She didn't cry for herself anymore. She cried for the woman she once was. The woman who could have remarried. The woman who could have abandoned her children too. But she stayed and loved and labored. And now, the fruit of her sacrifice was a conversation behind a curtain, measuring her life against a hospital bill. It was a Tuesday morning. The sky was gray, and the clouds hung low like they had something to say. The children had just finished eating boiled yam and palm oil when Obinna packed a small bag. Nena thought he was going to the market. She was washing clothes at the back of the compound when she noticed he wasn't wearing his usual slippers. He had on a clean shirt, the one she ironed last week, and polished shoes. Something felt strange. She asked him where he was going. He didn't answer. He just said, "I can't do this anymore." At first, she thought he meant the rent. Or maybe the school fees. But when he added, "You're holding me back," her world started to tilt. She followed him to the gate, begging him to explain. That was when he told her he had met someone, a better woman, a richer woman, someone who understood him. Nena fell to her knees and held his leg. The neighbors peeked from behind their curtains. Obinna looked at her with disgust and said, "Let go of me. You're embarrassing yourself." Then he pulled away and walked off. Just like that. No goodbye to the children. No backward glance. That evening, Nena didn't sleep. She lay on the cold floor with her children clinging to her. She had no words for them, just tears. How do you tell 3 toddlers that their father has chosen another life? How do you explain betrayal when you haven't even processed it? She stared at the zinc roof above and swore silently that her children would not suffer. That no matter what, she would raise them right. She didn't know how or where the strength would come from, but she knew one thing: she would not fail them. The next morning, she tied her wrapper tightly, carried a bowl of okra to the market, and started a journey of survival. From that day, she became mother and father, provider and protector, teacher and shield. Her love for her children was pure, not perfect, but sacrificial. And that love became her reason for waking each morning. And now, decades later, that same love was left to die behind a hospital curtain. The man who walked away from her didn't break her as much as the children who stayed and turned away. Obinna had been selfish, but her children, they were heartless. Because they knew what she endured. They knew the truth of their childhood. And still, they chose abandonment, just like their father. Lying there in silence, Mama Nena realized something even more painful than betrayal. History had repeated itself, but this time, through the very lives she had built from her brokenness. The days that followed Obinna's abandonment were some of the darkest in Nena's life, yet they became the foundation of her strength. She woke each morning with swollen eyes and tired bones, but never allowed herself to collapse. Her children were too small to understand what had happened, but she refused to let them feel fatherless. She became everything they needed, even when it drained her completely. She carried heavy trays of vegetables on her head to the market under the hot sun, walking barefoot on the cracked tar roads in Succa, her back aching, her throat dry, but her spirit quietly praying. She would sell from dawn to dusk, sometimes returning with less than 200 Nigerian nairas in profit. But she never failed to buy bread or beans for her children. At night, while they slept, she sat under the flickering lantern, stitching torn clothes, praying softly into the silence of the night. "God, keep me alive for them," she whispered into the darkness. There was no one to help, no family, no brothers. Her own parents had died early. What she had left were 3 innocent souls who thought the world was safe just because she smiled. To make ends meet, she took on all sorts of odd jobs. During dry season, she fetched water for compound owners in exchange for leftover food. She cleaned gutters, washed people's laundry even when her hands bled from soap. During planting season, she bent in the sun for hours, uprooting cassava or harvesting maize for distant relatives who paid her in mud-stained naira notes. It was in those fields that she learned resilience, not just with her body, but with her heart. The ache of missing Obinna never fully left her, but it hardened into a quiet resolve. She watched her children grow, little Adiz helping her wash plates, Kalechi chasing after firewood, Samto always sick but smiling. They didn't have toys. They didn't know birthdays. But they had warmth and love and stories. Every night, Nena told them tales about the moon and strong women and kings who were poor but wise. She raised them with pride, not bitterness. With kindness, not blame. She gave so much that she often forgot to keep anything for herself. But that was her way: give until you're empty, then give again. It was during one of those moments, when she had barely earned enough to feed her children, that she met the small orphan girl who would one day save her life. Her name was Anyanyeki. She was just 9, standing outside the school gate in tattered uniform, weeping because her exam fees hadn't been paid. No one helped her. The teachers mocked her, and the headmaster sent her home. Nena, walking by with her own son tied to her back, paused. She asked what the problem was. Anyanyeki explained in broken words. Without thinking, Nena opened her wrapper, brought out 500 Nigerian nairas, the exact money she had saved for her family's dinner, and gave it to the girl. "Go and write your exam," she said gently. "God will feed us another way." She didn't know who Anyanyeki was. She didn't ask for anything in return. That was the kind of woman Nena was. She gave freely, fully, foolishly, and never imagined that the seed she planted in secret would one day be her salvation. There were many nights Nena went to bed on an empty stomach, her belly burning with hunger, her head throbbing with stress. But her children never knew. She made sure they always had something, even if it was just a slice of yam and a prayer. When food finished and money didn't come, she sang hymns to distract them. "Jehovah is your strength," she would hum, braiding Adiz's hair under the moonlight, while Kalechi warmed water for tea made from dried lemon leaves. She became inventive with survival. Leftover mwamwa leaves became plates. Torn clothes were stitched into new ones. Gary was soaked with hope instead of milk. Even when storms flooded their room or when malaria struck down 2 children at once, Nena didn't give up. She boiled bitter herbs, carried them to hospitals on her back, and stood in long queues at clinics, holding babies whose cries echoed her own helplessness. But she remained strong, because to collapse would mean the whole house would crumble. She was not just the roof, she was the entire house. Every act of kindness she offered to others came from a place of deep empathy. She knew what it meant to have nothing. So when a neighbor lost her husband, Nena brought her firewood. When another woman had no baby clothes, she gave her Samto's old wrappers. She didn't have much, but she gave from her spirit. And because she never asked for anything in return, people often forgot to thank her. They called her that quiet widow, that woman with too much pride, the one who thinks love is enough. But she smiled through all. What they didn't know was that every seed she planted was being counted, not by man, but by God. Still, the human part of her, frail and tender, longed to be seen, appreciated, remembered. She never said it out loud. But every time her children succeeded, when Adiz passed her WEC, when Kelechi got admitted to university, when Samto received his first scholarship, she looked to the sky and whispered, "Thank you, Lord. My labor is not in vain." But now, lying in a government hospital bed, Nena wondered if she had been wrong. Had her faith been misplaced? Had her sacrifices been wasted? The children she had poured everything into now saw her as a burden. They didn't remember the hunger, the bruises, the sleepless nights. They didn't remember her walking miles in the rain to sell palm oil. They remembered only what they didn't get: fancy birthdays, overseas trips, the kind of wealth other families had. And so, they resented her. She realized that in trying to give them everything, she had never taught them how to love. They had grown up chasing success, but not compassion. And now, the price was being paid with her dignity. She closed her eyes again and prayed, not for healing anymore, but for meaning. If this was how her life was to end, she needed to know it was not in vain. Nena's greatest joy had always been her children. She watched them grow like trees she planted with her own tears. Adiz, the eldest, was always headstrong. She was the one who asked questions, who didn't cry easily, who seemed to carry the world in her little shoulders. Nena poured herself into Adiz's dreams, walking her to school each morning, borrowing money for her textbooks, standing by her side when she got rejected from nursing school the first time. She made Adiz try again, and again, and eventually she succeeded. Kelechi, her second child, had a gentler soul. He was the boy who wrote poems in the sand, who helped her cook, who sat with her on quiet evenings and asked about her childhood. He was the one who fetched water when she was too weak to stand. But even Kelechi began to change when he joined the university. His letters became fewer, his calls shorter. Money replaced conversation. And then there was Samto, the sickly child, the miracle boy. He had almost died at birth. She had spent 3 days praying beside his little body in the mission clinic, refusing to let go. He survived, and she carried that survival like a badge of honor. But Samto, too, grew up and drifted away. All 3 children had promised to build her a house someday. They said it every Christmas. "Mama, next year you won't sleep on this mat again." "Mama, once I get the promotion, I'll buy you a gas cooker." "Mama, once I hammer, I'll take you to Dubai." But the years passed, and the promises became echoes. They visited less, sent money late, argued more. Sometimes they blamed each other. Sometimes they blamed her. "You didn't build us to be united," Adiz once said after a quarrel with Kelechi. Nena listened and wept in silence. She didn't understand. She thought love was enough. She had given them the best of her soul, but somehow they grew up hollow in places she couldn't reach. She didn't know when they stopped seeing her as mother and started seeing her as weight, a responsibility to avoid, a problem to delay. And now, years later, she lay in a hospital, fighting for breath, her ears still echoing with their words. Let her rest. No more treatment. She's old. It was Kelechi's voice that hurt the most. The boy who once brought her wildflowers and called her his angel. How did that boy become this man? She couldn't find the answer. She didn't want to. Her body was tired. Her heart was tired. But deep within her, a small flame still burned. The part of her that had once knelt to help a crying girl outside a school gate. The part of her that had once gone hungry just so a stranger could have yam. That flame whispered, "Your story isn't over." And though she didn't know it yet, someone else was walking down the corridor, holding a tray of medicine, about to change her fate forever. The day Nena began to realize her children had changed was not marked by any loud argument or disrespect. It was more like a slow erosion, small things that began to wear down the foundation of love she thought they had built together. It began when Adiz stopped answering her calls, claiming she was always on duty. Then came Kelechi, who started sending money without a single word, as if bank alerts could replace conversation. Samto, who once ran to hug her when he returned from school, now waved casually, often without stepping out of the car. She noticed their tone when they spoke to her, how they began to refer to her in the third person during family meetings. "She should be fine. She can stay in the village. We'll send her something." They no longer spoke with her, but about her. The closeness they once shared had become a distant memory, and every time she tried to bridge the gap, she met a wall of polite indifference. Nena, who once thought her children would rise together and build her a peaceful old age, was now quietly mourning the death of their gratitude. But she didn't complain. She smiled when they visited, even if only for 10 minutes. She cooked their favorite meals with the same shaky hands that once carried them, even if they barely tasted it. She offered them blessings when they gave her little, and never once brought up the years of labor she had endured alone. She believed love wasn't something you demanded, it was something you gave. She excused their behavior as the stress of adulthood, of modern life. But deep inside, something had started to ache. Not her body. She was used to pain. It was her heart. That silent place inside her that once swelled with pride whenever she saw her children dressed in uniforms or attending their first day at university. That place now felt hollow. Her children had climbed the ladder of success, and instead of looking down to pull her up, they had forgotten who placed the ladder in the first place. It wasn't the lack of money that hurt her, it was the lack of memory. Still, she remained kind. She continued to give to neighbors, prayed for strangers, and helped anyone who came to her. She believed the world needed more giving hearts. But lately, she began to wonder, did the world even care for such hearts anymore? She watched as people took and never returned. Not just things, but love, time, respect. Her children had become people she no longer recognized. Polished, proud, and cold. She thought of all the nights she carried each of them to church vigils on her back. The times she sold her necklace to buy jam forms. The day she almost fainted in the market because she hadn't eaten, just so Kelechi could have a new pair of shoes. And now, those sacrifices sat like dust on old memories. Forgotten. Unacknowledged. And when she finally collapsed weeks ago and was rushed to the hospital, they had come only to ask the doctor if she was worth saving. That was when she knew. Gratitude had left their hearts a long time ago. The house in the village had once been her pride, a small mud brick structure with a tin roof that sang loudly when it rained. It wasn't much, but it held decades of laughter, pain, prayers, and memories. The front steps still carried the marks of little feet running barefoot. The bedroom walls still bore faint charcoal drawing Santo had scribbled as a boy. The small veranda had heard every story she ever told. But now the house was falling apart, cracks splitting through the walls like silent screams. Termites had eaten through the wooden doors, and the kitchen sink leaked constantly. The last time Adiz visited, she wrinkled her nose and said, "Mama, this house smells like sorrow. Why don't you move in with me?" Nena smiled weakly and said, "This house gave me strength. I'll stay here." But what she didn't say was that she knew Adiz's invitation was not out of love. It was obligation, maybe even guilt. And she didn't want to live in a place where she would feel like a stranger to her own child. At night, when the generator sounds faded and the village went still, she sat by the window and stared at the moon. She missed the sound of her children laughing. She missed their tiny hands in hers, their whispers in the dark asking for bedtime stories. Now, all she had were echoes. The loneliness was no longer just emotional, it was physical. Her knees ached from the hard floor. Her eyes strained from the weak lantern. Her heart, most of all, carried a tired weight. But she refused to complain. She still swept the compound each morning, still washed her clothes by hand, still prepared meals even when no one visited, because hope, no matter how bruised, refused to die inside her. She still believed, foolishly perhaps, that one day her children would come, see her, really see her, and remember. But the day they rushed her to the hospital, everything changed. The village women had found her lying on the kitchen floor, clutching her chest, whispering prayers. They called her children, and after 2 days they arrived, not with tears, not with urgency, but with frustration. Kelechi was annoyed at the delay. Adiz kept checking her phone, and Santo complained about the village road. Even as she lay on the hospital bed, drifting in and out of consciousness, she could feel their impatience. She heard them discuss shifts, heard them argue over who would pay for the next dose of injection. And then she heard the words that would haunt her forever. Let her rest. There's no point spending more money. As if her life was a failed investment. As if she had become a bill to be settled and forgotten. That was when the cracks in her house moved into her soul. Anyanyeki had been working the night shift when she first recognized the name on the patient chart, Nenais. It struck a chord deep and sudden, like a song from childhood. She walked into the ward and saw the frail old woman lying there, skin sagging over bones, eyes dull but familiar. At first, she couldn't believe it. She moved closer, leaned down, and softly whispered, "Mama, do you remember me?" The woman didn't answer. She was too weak, but something in her expression shifted. That same warmth, that same silent strength. Anyanyeki knew it was her. The woman who had once given her 500 Nigerian nairas outside a school gate, who had smiled and said, "God will feed us another way." It had been years, but some acts of kindness carved their names into the soul. Anyanyeki's life had changed that day. She passed her exams, won scholarships, and became a nurse, and all because one stranger had believed she deserved a chance. Tears gathered in her eyes as she gently held Mama Nena's hand. The other nurses didn't understand her sudden devotion. They didn't know the story. But Anyanyeki refused to let this woman die alone. When the doctor hesitated about further treatment, Anyanyeki insisted. "She's not just a patient," she said firmly. "She matters." She paid for some of the drugs herself, stayed late to monitor her vitals, even skipped meals just to sit with her. Slowly, Mama Nena began to stabilize. Her breathing eased. Her eyes opened more often, and though she didn't speak much, her fingers often curled tightly around Anyanyeki's hand, as if to say, "You found me. You remembered." In those quiet moments, the bond between them grew deeper than blood. Nena had once saved a little girl from failure. Now that girl had returned to save her from abandonment. It wasn't long before Nena began to whisper short sentences. She told Anyanyeki about the curtain, the voices, the betrayal. She didn't cry. Her voice was calm, like someone who had accepted her fate but wanted to leave the truth behind. Anyanyeki listened with clenched fists and a burning heart. How could children forget such a mother? How could they weigh her life against a wallet? She promised Nena that she wouldn't be left to die. "You gave me life when no one else would," she said softly. "Now let me give it back to you." And in that hospital room, surrounded by the smell of disinfectant and the hum of old machines, a new chapter began. One not written by ungrateful children, but by a stranger who had once been saved by a woman the world tried to throw away. Anyanyeki stood at the edge of the ward that evening, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she stared at the prescription sheet in her hand. The doctor had left strict instructions. No more aggressive treatment. "The family has decided against it," he said, avoiding her eyes. But Anyanyeki could not accept that. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was the living proof that Mama Nena's sacrifices had not been wasted. She took it personally. With tears of silent fury in her eyes, she walked out of the hospital and used her last salary to purchase a round of medications. Her account was nearly empty, but her spirit had never been richer. She administered the IVs herself. She cleaned Nena's wounds with the gentleness of a daughter and spoke to her like someone worth saving. The old woman, frail as she was, began to respond. Her fever eased. Her hands, once limp, began to twitch. And slowly, the light in her eyes began to flicker again, not yet strong, but stubborn. Word spread among the hospital staff that the old woman, who was supposed to be left alone, was recovering. But no one knew why. Anyanyeki didn't care about the stares or the murmurs. She had a mission now. Her entire life had been built on the kindness of this woman, and if that kindness had been buried by her own children's greed, then it was up to her to unearth it and give it breath again. Nena had told her pieces of her story in hushed tones, how she sold everything to send her children to school, how she gave and gave without keeping anything for herself, how she overheard them deciding her fate like she was a file to be closed. Anyanyeki's heart cracked a little more with every word. She thought about her own childhood, about how that 500 Nigerian nairas note changed the trajectory of her life. What if Mama hadn't stopped that day? What if she had walked past her like everyone else? You saved me when no one did, she whispered one night as Nena slept, her chest rising with steadier breaths. Now it's my turn. By the second week, the doctor was shocked. Nena could sit up. She was eating small portions. She was even asking for tea. Her voice was soft but steady, and she no longer spoke of death. She spoke of flowers, of rain on her village roof, of the sound of Santo's laughter when he was 5. Her body was recovering, but her heart remained guarded. When Anyanyeki mentioned her children, her expression went blank. They left me long before they walked away, she said. I just refused to see it. That night, as Anyanyeki helped her brush her thinning hair, she made a quiet vow to herself. Nena would not return to that old house alone. She would not live out her final years surrounded by cracked walls and silence. The children may have walked away, but this woman would not be forgotten. Not if Anyanyeki had anything to do with it. The morning was quiet when Mama Nena asked for a pen and paper. Anyanyeki fetched it without question, sensing something sacred in the old woman's tone. For hours, Nena sat upright in bed, her thin fingers trembling as she wrote, slowly, deliberately, with pauses between each line. She didn't write with bitterness. She wrote with grief, with a heart that had poured out everything and received nothing but absence in return. She addressed the letter to her 3 children, Adiz, Kalechi, and Santo, not with anger, but with resignation. She thanked them for what they didn't do. Because of you, she wrote, I finally saw the truth I refused to believe. That love, when not returned, becomes a wound. And I carried mine until it bled me dry. She ended the letter with a single sentence that carried more pain than any curse. I release you not from responsibility, but from my expectations. Anyanyeki read the letter only after Nena sealed it. She wept silently. There was no accusation in the words, but the sorrow in them was louder than any scream. That afternoon, Nena told her she was ready to leave the hospital. Not to return home, she said gently, but to go where peace lives. With Anyanyeki's help, she signed the discharge papers. The doctor raised his eyebrows but didn't question her decision. She was now lucid, stable, and able to make her own choices. The bill, mostly unpaid, was quietly settled by Anyanyeki with savings she had intended to use for her younger brother's tuition. But she didn't flinch. To her, this wasn't debt. It was repayment, in the only currency that truly mattered, compassion. That evening, they left the hospital quietly. No children came to escort her. No family. Just the young nurse pushing a wheelchair, and the woman the world had forgotten, wrapped in a faded Ankara shawl, holding a letter like a final breath. They didn't return to the village house with the cracked walls. Instead, Anyanyeki took her to a rented room not far from her own quarters. A clean, airy place with a proper mattress and soft curtains. It wasn't luxurious, but it was filled with presence. Each night, she sat with Nena and read her psalms. They laughed sometimes, cried often, talked about the past and what little future was left. And in those quiet days, Mama Nena began to heal not just in body, but in spirit. Her smile returned, not the forced, polite one she had worn for years, but a genuine curve of peace. And yet, she never spoke about returning to her children. Some bridges, she said one day, are better left burned when the path leads only to pain. Anyanyeki nodded. She understood. Because sometimes letting go isn't bitterness, it's survival. It was a warm afternoon when Mama Nena asked Anyanyeki to call a lawyer. At first, Anyanyeki was confused. I don't have anything big, Nena said with a tired chuckle. But what I do have, I wanted to go to the one who stayed. She didn't say more than that, and Anyanyeki, humbled and startled, obeyed. The lawyer came the next day, a young man from the area who had worked with low-income families before. He sat down with his file, expecting a simple statement. But what Mama Nena revealed stunned him. Over the years, she had quietly held onto a plot of ancestral land, the one where her family home stood. It wasn't registered formally, but the village elders had long acknowledged it as hers. In addition to that, She had savings from small investments her late father had made, kept hidden in a cooperative account that her children knew nothing about. She had intended to surprise them one day, believing they would be grateful. But after the hospital betrayal, her spirit changed. As the lawyer drew up the documents, Nena dictated every detail with sharp clarity. Everything, the land, the savings, even the house, give it to Anyanyeki, she said. The lawyer blinked. Are you sure, madam? He asked cautiously. She smiled. My children are educated. They wear suits. They live in air-conditioned houses. But they forgot how to love. Anyanyeki remembered. There was no vengeance in her voice, just quiet conviction. Anyanyeki wept again, falling to her knees beside the bed. Mama, you don't have to, but Nena touched her face gently. I'm not doing this to reward you. I'm doing this to honor what love is supposed to look like. The documents were signed, witnessed, sealed. And just like that, the course of inheritance changed, not by power or greed, but by grace. After the lawyer left, Nena sat by the window with Anyanyeki and watched the sun fall behind the trees. She didn't look like a woman who had lost everything. She looked like a woman who had finally reclaimed something far more valuable, her voice. When people show you what you mean to them, she said, believe them. I believed in fantasy too long. Now I walk in truth. The silence that followed was filled with peace. Somewhere, in a world obsessed with wealth and noise, 3 children would wake up one day and realize that they had inherited nothing, not because they were hated, but because they forgot to remember. And somewhere else, a nurse who was once a hungry girl with torn sandals would now carry forward the legacy of a woman who once gave her hope. Adiz walked into the hospital 5 days after her mother's discharge, not out of concern, but out of control. Her siblings had been calling her frantically after learning that Mama Nena had left the hospital, and no one knew where she had gone. Adiz, who had always worn the badge of first daughter with quiet superiority, was furious, not at her mother's condition, but at the embarrassment. How could that old woman just disappear without telling us? She hissed into her phone while walking through the corridor. She had expected to find Mama still curled on the hospital bed, weak and waiting for her children to finally do what they never truly intended to do, care. Instead, she found the bed empty and the nurse's desk stacked with charts. When she asked to see the doctor, he received her with cool professionalism. Your mother was discharged 5 days ago, he said. A nurse handled the process. Adiz blinked. What nurse? The doctor mentioned Anyanyeki's name, the same name that rang faint bells from her childhood, a name once whispered in a tear-stained memory of a poor girl Mama once helped. The realization struck Adiz harder than she expected. She had known her mother to be generous, foolishly so. She had always told Mama to stop giving away money to strangers, to stop helping people who could never repay her. Focus on your own family, Adiz would say. But Mama never listened. And now, it seemed that one of those people had come back, not to take, but to give. As Adiz left the doctor's office, the truth pressed down on her like heat. She tried to call her brothers, but her hands were shaking. Kelechi picked up. Any news? He asked. She's not there, she replied. She left with someone. A nurse. There was silence on the line. They both understood without saying it. Whatever control they thought they had over their mother's life was gone. They hadn't just ignored her. They had been replaced. Not by blood, but by loyalty. And for the first time in years, Adiz felt a pit open in her stomach. One that no money, no position, no prayer chain could fill. That night, Adiz sat alone in her furnished apartment in Enugu, staring at an untouched plate of food. She kept hearing her mother's voice in her head, soft, forgiving, always hopeful. One day you'll understand, Mama had once said during a quarrel. You'll know what it feels like to give everything and receive nothing. Adiz had rolled her eyes then, brushing it off as guilt-tripping. But now, it echoed with painful clarity. She didn't cry. Adiz had built a life that didn't allow for tears. But her chest felt heavy, her breath shallow, as the weight of neglect began to settle. She realized she didn't know where her mother was. Worse, she didn't know how to begin looking, not physically, but emotionally. Because what do you say to a woman you abandoned when she needed you most? What do you say to a mother who finally stopped waiting? News came to the village like wind through dry leaves, quiet at first, then noisy, full of dust, and impossible to ignore. Representatives from the state government had arrived, inspecting lands along the eastern border of Nena's village for a proposed housing and industrial project. For decades, the family compound had been dismissed by her children as worthless, just an aging structure on tired land. But suddenly, it became gold. The land where Mama Nena's house stood was the centerpiece of the new development plan. Surveyors, accompanied by government officials, came with equipment, drawing lines, taking notes, and speaking in the kind of English that made villagers stare. They brought maps and documents and explained that the state was offering large payouts to any family willing to give up their ancestral land. The villagers buzzed with excitement. Old men dreamed of new roofs. Young boys imagined motorcycles. And gossip rose like smoke from every compound. Kelechi heard the news from a friend whose uncle worked in the Ministry of Housing. "I think your family land is involved, oh," the man said, grinning. At first, Kelechi dismissed it. But when he received official confirmation that Mama's property had been surveyed and earmarked for acquisition, with a compensation offer in the tens of millions, he sat up straight. The property they had mocked, neglected, and considered a burden was now the ticket to generational wealth. He immediately called the D's and Santo, his voice vibrating with urgency. "Do you know what that land is worth now? We have to act fast. Mama may not even realize what's happening. If we get her to sign it over, we can cash out before the offer expires." But there was a problem. They didn't know where she was. And worse, the land was no longer in her name. When they finally reached the village head to inquire, they were met with a blank stare and a quiet chuckle. "You people," he said, shaking his head. "You're too late." He then told them, calmly, almost with pity, that Mama Nena had visited a few weeks ago and formally handed over all her rights to the land to another person. "A young nurse," he said. "One girl like that. Anyinyechi." She brought proper documentation, witnesses, and even made a donation to the community. The children stood frozen. Adi's mouth went dry. Kelechi broke into a sweat. Santo, ever impatient, raised his voice. She had no right. We are her children. But the village head only shrugged. She had every right. It was still hers, until she gave away. And with those words, the illusion of entitlement collapsed. The land was gone, and so was their last inheritance. The drive back from the village was a long, suffocating silence. Kelechi clenched the steering wheel like he was holding onto the last piece of his pride. Adiz sat in the back seat, staring blankly out the window, her mind filled with images of the family land, the same land she once mocked, now holding the keys to a fortune they could no longer touch. Santo was the first to break the silence. "So that's it? We're just going to let one stranger take what belongs to us?" Kelechi didn't answer, not because he agreed, but because he knew deep down it was already over. The documents were airtight. The village elders had confirmed it. Mama had made the decision while she was of sound mind and full control. There was nothing to challenge legally. They had been left out, not by accident, but by design. And the reason was painfully clear. They had made their mother feel disposable. Later that evening, they gathered in Adi's home, too angry to eat, too proud to weep. They argued for hours, accusing each other, blaming schedules, pointing fingers. "You were supposed to check on her last month." "No, you were the one who didn't send money. She always preferred you, and you still abandoned her." But beneath the shouting was a quiet truth none of them dared to say aloud. They had all failed. They had turned their mother into an afterthought. And now she had turned them into strangers. The offer from the government still stood, but it no longer included them. The land's new legal owner was Anyinyechi, the same girl they didn't even remember, a ghost from the past who had become the guardian of their mother's final blessings. They sat in that living room, surrounded by wealth, comfort, and silence, realizing for the first time that inheritance isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who showed up. Meanwhile, back in the quiet room where Nena now lived, Anyanyeki received the government letter confirming the land's acquisition. Her hands trembled as she held the check, a fortune she had never dreamed of. She turned to Nena with tears in her eyes. "Mama, I don't know what to do with this kind of money." Nena smiled, her face glowing in the amber light. "Then do what you've always done," she said softly. "Give life. Give hope. Build something that cannot be stolen." In that moment, the contrast between the two women and the three children they had left behind became clearer than ever. One woman had given without asking, and one girl had remembered. The others had taken without gratitude, and now they were left with nothing, not even a name on a deed. They came in the late afternoon, dressed sharply in guilt and entitlement, their voices raised at the compound gate like debt collectors at a business they once owned. Adiz, Kelechi, and Samto stood before Anyanyeki's modest bungalow, their shadows stretched long by the sinking sun. When Anyanyeki stepped out, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel, they didn't greet her. They didn't smile. They didn't even call her by name. "We want to see our mother," Adiz said coldly. Anyanyeki stood firm, her eyes calm but unwavering. "She's resting," she replied. "And I'm not sure she wants to see you." Kelechi scoffed. "You think this is your house? You think you're one of us?" Samto stepped forward. "Look, we don't have time for games. You've manipulated an old woman into giving you our family land, our inheritance. We are her children. You are nothing but a nurse she once helped." Those words, "nothing but a nurse," hung in the air like smoke, thick and offensive. Anyanyeki didn't flinch. She looked at each of them, one by one, and then slowly reached for the envelope she had been holding behind her back. "Your mother wrote you a letter," she said, handing it to Adiz. "Weeks ago, before she left the hospital. She asked me to give it to you when you were ready to understand." Adiz snatched it but said nothing. They opened the envelope right there, still fuming. As the letter unfolded in their hands, so did the truth, word by painful word. It wasn't a bitter letter. Mama Nena had written with sorrow, not spite. She thanked them for the childhood years she cherished, but gently confessed how deeply they had hurt her. She wrote of overhearing them tell the doctor to let her die. She wrote of remembering every moment she carried them, starved for them, and waited for them. And she ended the letter with one final line. "The one who loved me when you abandoned me now carries what I would have left for you, not as punishment, but as remembrance." The silence that followed was unbearable. Adiz broke down first. Her knees buckled, and she sat on the ground, tears flowing freely. Kelechi turned away, jaw clenched, fists shaking with helplessness. Samto paced back and forth, cursing under his breath. "She gave everything to us," Adiz whispered, "and we treated her like a burden." Anyanyeki said nothing. She only stepped aside and gestured toward the house. "If you want to see her, you may," she said quietly. "But don't do it for the land. Don't do it for what's gone. Do it for what's dying inside each of you." They walked in slowly, not like children coming home, but like strangers entering a sacred place. Inside, they found Mama Nena sleeping, her face peaceful, her breathing calm. She stirred when they knelt beside her, and when she opened her eyes and saw them weeping, she did not speak. She only turned her face toward the wall, not in hatred, but in hurt too deep for words. Back in the village, word of the government payment had spread like wildfire, but so had the whispers about who now owned Mama Nena's land. Some gossiped out of envy, others out of confusion. "That girl," they said, "she's not even related to her." But when Anyanyeki arrived in the village, she didn't come with bodyguards or pride. She came with plans, blueprints, and humility. With Mama Nena's quiet blessing and a portion of the compensation money, she announced her intention to build a small health center, not a flashy hospital, but a community clinic where women like Nena could be treated with dignity. There would be no long lines, no dismissive doctors, no children whispering behind curtains about who deserved to live. Just care. Real, patient, intentional care. When the first brick was laid, the same neighbors who had mocked her before now came to carry water, to dig soil, to help. The building rose slowly, like healing after deep wounds. Mama Nena visited the site twice, sitting under a mango tree while the workers greeted her like a queen. Anyanyeki stood beside her each time, updating her on progress, holding her hand, interpreting every architectural drawing like a language only the two of them spoke. "I want it named after you," Anyanyeki said one evening. "The Nena Center for Women and Children." The old woman smiled, the kind that reaches the eyes. "Then make sure it speaks with kindness," she said. "Let it be the voice I didn't have when I was suffering." And so the clinic became more than a structure. It became a monument, not just to survival, but to silent warriors like Nena who gave without expecting, endured without recognition, and died a little each time their love was returned with silence. When the ribbon was finally cut months later, there were no media cameras, no politicians, just villagers, patients, mothers with crying babies, and a woman sitting in a wheelchair, her eyes filled with tears. Her children did not attend the event, not because they were unwelcome, but because they knew deep down that this moment was no longer about them. It was about a legacy that could not be shared by people who had forgotten how to love. Anyanyeki stood beside Nena as she spoke softly to the gathering. This place was built from tears, not just mine, but many others. Let it be where tears end, not where they begin. The crowd clapped. But more than applause, there was respect. And that respect, finally, gave Mama Nena something she had never truly received in her life. The honor she always gave, now returned in full. The road was dusty, just as he remembered, though the houses now stood taller, newer, painted in shades that mocked the memories of his past. Obinna returned not with a suitcase full of gifts, but with a body weighed down by regret. Decades had passed since he left Nena and the children. His wealth had risen and fallen like a wave. The woman he abandoned his family for had bled him dry, then left him for a younger man. His friends had disappeared. His children from the second marriage wanted nothing to do with him. Now, old and coughing blood, he had returned to the only place where his name once meant something. But when he reached the family compound, he didn't find the house he once built. Instead, he found a tall building with white walls and a golden sign, the Nena Center for Women and Children. He thought it was a mistake, until he saw her name again, and the face carved on the plaque outside. He stumbled forward, demanding to know who now lived in his house. The guards at the gate barely acknowledged him. "This land belongs to the center," one said. "You can't just walk in." Obinna tried to shout, but his voice cracked. He tried to explain, to say he was once the man of this house, the owner of this land. But the villagers only stared at him like a ghost. Finally, one old woman approached him, Mama Ifeoma, who remembered. "You left her," she said softly, "and she rebuilt everything with the pieces you abandoned." He fell to his knees, not from exhaustion, but from something heavier, the weight of every choice he made. He asked where Nena was. She pointed to the bungalow nearby. "She lives there now. But you should know, she is not waiting for you." Obinna made his way there anyway, dragging his pride like a bag of stones. He found her sitting under a tree, her legs covered with a wrapper, her eyes far away. When she saw him, she blinked twice but didn't rise. "Obinna," she said simply, "you're still alive." He knelt before her, trembling. "Nena, I came back. I came to make things right." Her face was unreadable. "You didn't come back for me. You came back because you have nowhere left to go." He lowered his head. "I was wrong. I was blind." She looked at him, then really looked at him. "Yes," she whispered, "but now you're too late." And with that, she turned away, not in hatred, but in a kind of mercy that says, "You don't deserve my anger anymore." Obinna wept quietly at her feet, a shadow of the man who once walked away, now begging in the place where he once ruled. But some things once lost can only be mourned, not reclaimed. The court session was brief but brutal. When Kalechi, Adiz, and Samto attempted to challenge the transfer of the land and assets to Anyanyeki, they did so not out of love, but out of desperation. Their lawyer, an overly confident young man with slick words and no moral footing, built a case around the idea of manipulation, that their elderly mother had been coerced, by an outsider while mentally unstable. But as the trial unfolded, truth didn't bend to their claims. Anyanyeki stood with quiet dignity, presenting every receipt, every recorded consent form, every village chief's testimony. More importantly, she submitted the letter Mama Nena had written in her own hand, dated, signed, and witnessed. It wasn't just a will, it was a heartbreak transcribed in ink. The courtroom fell into silence as it was read aloud, and for the first time in their adult lives, Nena's children were forced to sit still and listen. Not speak, not argue, just listen. The judge, an older woman with eyes that had seen too many versions of this story, didn't hide her disdain. She looked at the three siblings, as if they were schoolchildren who had failed the simplest test, love. Your mother was of sound mind, she declared. She made her decisions with full clarity. What I see here is not injustice against children. What I see is justice finally reaching a woman who had been denied it for far too long. With those words, she upheld the transfer of the land, the savings, and any future compensation to Anyanyeki, the daughter she never bore, but who treated her with more dignity than all of you combined. There was no applause, only silence. Kelechi lowered his head. Santo bit his lips, and Adiz wept quietly, her face buried in a scarf she once wore proudly. Their names, once written in Nena's dreams, were now absent from everything she would leave behind. Back at Anyanyeki's home, Nena was waiting by the window. She didn't ask how the court hearing went. She didn't need to. She had already let go. Regret, she said that evening, as she sipped warm pap, is like a bed with no mattress. You lie down, thinking it will give you comfort, but all you feel is pain. Anyanyeki nodded, understanding more than words could say. They sat quietly for a long time, listening to the evening crickets. Nena's eyes weren't bitter, they were at peace. For the first time in her life, she wasn't holding on to anything. Not dreams, not wounds, not unspoken hopes. Her children had made their choices. So had she. Now, there was nothing left to prove, only to live what remained in dignity. Let them go, she whispered. I've already forgiven them, but I won't invite them in again. Some doors need to remain closed, even if your heart is open. Morning sunlight poured gently into the small compound where Mama Nena now lived, a bungalow built from compassion, not bricks. Flowers bloomed by the window where she often sat, watching children play outside the clinic. Anyanyeki's staff bustled around with quiet energy. Inside the clinic, patients received care, not just treatment, from nurses who had been trained in kindness first and medicine second. It wasn't a hospital in the grand sense. It had no marble floors or air-conditioned lobbies. But it had what many places lacked: soul. A spirit born from the suffering of one woman who had once been told her life wasn't worth saving. The villagers now spoke her name with reverence. She is the mother of this place, they said. Not because she built it, but because she inspired it. Strangers came with gifts. Widows came for comfort. Pregnant girls came for hope. And in the middle of it all sat Nena, older, slower, but finally undeniably seen. She never spoke of the money again. Not to boast. Not to shame. The check that once represented millions had been divided thoughtfully, not for personal gain, but for impact. A portion went into the clinic. A portion into scholarship programs for poor girls. A portion was used to renovate water lines for the community. The rest she entrusted to Anyanyeki, not with conditions, but with trust. Whatever you use it for, she said, let it carry my heart. Anyanyeki wept again that day, not from sadness, but from awe that a woman so deeply wounded still chose to give, still chose to build, still chose to leave behind something better than bitterness. As for Nena's children, they faded from the story like names in a book never read again. They called occasionally. Sometimes they sent messages. But the connection had burned, not by revenge, but by the weight of their own neglect. On her final birthday, the compound was filled with singing. The clinic staff baked a small cake, the children danced in circles, and Mama Nena sat in a white wrapper, smiling as they sang, "Happy birthday, Mama." Her hands trembled as she held Anyanyeki's palm. I used to think I failed because I lost them, she said. But now I know, I was never lost. They just chose to walk away. She looked out toward the gate, where a long line of villagers waited to greet her. See what love built, she whispered. That night, as the stars blinked above and silence returned to the village, Mama Nena finally slept, not in death, but in peace. Not as the woman they abandoned, but as the woman who rose again. Quietly, fully, victoriously. The woman they threw away had become a nation's mother, and her legacy would live long after every voice that told the doctor, "Let her die," had gone silent. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.